Tyleo topic 18 Signs an avoidant is secretly obsessed with you but won't admit it. Have you ever walked away from someone who acted like they didn't care only to feel like they never really let go? Maybe they ignored your texts but always watched your stories. Maybe they kept their distance but somehow always stayed just close enough to keep you wondering. Hey, I'm Jim Rohn, and today we're diving into something that nobody talks about enough: the hidden emotional world of avoidantly attached people, especially when they're secretly obsessed with you, but won't or can't admit it. Avoidants are complex. On the surface, they look calm, detached, maybe even indifferent. But what if I told you that beneath that emotional armor, they're paying a lot more attention to you than you think? What if their silence isn't the absence of feeling, but a mask for what they're terrified to reveal? In this video, I'll break down 5 specific signs that someone with avoidant tendencies may be more emotionally attached to you than they're letting on. You'll learn how this quiet obsession shows up through what they watch, how they respond when you pull away, what they remember, and the confusing ways they linger in your life while keeping their guard up. But most importantly, you'll understand why you're not crazy for sensing there's something deeper going on, even when they act like you don't matter. And I'll also give you the clarity to know what to do with this information so you don't lose yourself trying to decode someone who's hiding behind fear. So if you've ever been stuck in a cycle of emotional mixed signals, stay with me. This might explain everything. And if you want more real grounded conversations about emotional health, relationships, and reclaiming your self-worth, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if this already resonates, and leave a comment below because I'd love to hear what you've been through. Alright, let's get into it. 1. Hyperawareness, disguised as indifference. Let's talk about one of the most confusing dynamics in emotionally avoidant people. Their hyper-awareness that looks like indifference. It's subtle, and unless you understand what's really happening underneath, it's easy to take it personally. You reach out, and they don't respond. You share something meaningful, and they brush it off. You tell yourself they don't care. But that's only half the story, because even while they act disengaged, they're often watching everything, just silently, from a distance. Avoidantly attached individuals don't typically express affection in ways that feel emotionally safe or validating to their partners. Instead, they watch, they observe, they gather information. Not because they want to hurt you, but because this is how they try to stay close without exposing themselves. If they were honest, they might admit they're afraid of needing someone too much. But they won't. Often they won't even admit it to themselves. That's why they default to this quiet form of monitoring. It lets them feel connected without the risk of vulnerability. This is why you might see them skip your messages, but then they're the first to view your story. Or they won't ask how you're doing directly, but they'll bring up a detail from a post or conversation you barely remember. It's their way of saying, "I'm still paying attention," without saying anything at all. Because to be open would mean to admit that they care, and caring openly feels dangerous to them. It threatens their sense of emotional control. This kind of hidden attention can be incredibly confusing if you're on the receiving end. You start to question your reality. If they don't care, why are they still watching me? Why do they remember so much? Why do they show up in these quiet, indirect ways? That's the bind. They're emotionally invested, but emotionally unavailable. That combination creates tension. It creates this push-pull dynamic where you feel seen and ignored at the same time. What's important to understand here is that their silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. A lot is happening, but it's all happening internally, behind defenses they haven't learned how to lower yet. They're emotionally risk-averse. So instead of stepping forward, they study you from the shadows. They make sure you're still there without having to engage fully. It's how they protect themselves from rejection or engulfment, both of which feel equally dangerous to someone avoidant. The truth is, emotional detachment is their strategy, but it doesn't mean emotional absence. In fact, this kind of hyper-awareness often signals a deeper attachment than they're willing to admit. But because they can't express it safely, they disguise it as disinterest. And that's why it's so disorienting. You sense something real, but the words and actions don't match. That's not your imagination. It's the avoidant's internal conflict leaking out sideways. Recognizing this for what it is doesn't mean you tolerate mixed signals. But it does help you stop blaming yourself. Their monitoring isn't love, but it is evidence of emotional preoccupation. The difference is, obsession without vulnerability isn't connection. It's control. And you deserve more than to be watched, you deserve to be met. Now here's where things get more complicated when you stop chasing and start matching their emotional distance. Most people assume that if you pull away from an avoidant, they won't care. That they'll just let you go and move on cold and unaffected. But that's not what actually happens. What happens is panic. Not the kind of panic that looks like tears or desperate messages, but a much more disguised version. One that shows up as irritability, passive-aggressive jabs, or weird emotional power plays you didn't see coming. You see, when you step back, you're disrupting their sense of control. Avoidants often feel safest when they're the one creating distance. It gives them emotional leverage. They decide how close the connection gets when it intensifies and when it pauses. That gives them a sense of safety because vulnerability, real raw intimacy, has never felt predictable or safe to them. But when you step back, that emotional advantage slips out of their hands. And suddenly, they're not in charge of the closeness anymore. That loss of control, that's terrifying. And because avoidants have spent most of their lives avoiding that terror, they don't react in ways that are obvious. Instead of saying, "I'm scared I'm losing you," they might say something like, "You've been distant lately," or worse, they might act cold themselves, trying to beat you at the very game they didn't want you to play in the first place. They might criticize you over small things, suddenly become unavailable, or even try to make you jealous. It doesn't make much sense logically, but emotionally, it's how they try to regain their footing. What's really happening is that they feel exposed. Their usual dynamic where you're the one reaching, explaining, maintaining the bond, has broken. And without that dynamic, they have to face the possibility that they might lose you. But instead of leaning in with honesty, they revert to defensive strategies. They test you, they sabotage, they try to see if you'll come chasing again because that would mean they're still safe. That would mean you still care. But here's the trap: if you go chasing, you reinforce the very pattern that keeps both of you stuck. You teach them that they can retreat and you'll always bridge the gap. That doesn't create real connection. That creates emotional dependency and imbalance. And over time, it chips away at your self-respect. So what do? Instead, you hold your line. You don't retaliate and you don't collapse. You let their discomfort be theirs to deal with. Because if they're going to grow, if there's any hope of them learning how to show up emotionally, it won't happen through comfort. It will happen through the tension of realizing that people who care about them won't wait around forever in silence. Their panic isn't proof that they love you in a healthy way. It's proof that their fear of losing control is stronger than their ability to connect vulnerably. And that's not something you can fix. You didn't cause their fear, but you can refuse to dance with it. Now, this next sign is subtle, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Avoidants tend to remember everything you forget. And I'm not talking about major milestones or dramatic conversations. I'm talking about the little things, the things you mentioned once and never brought up again. Your favorite coffee blend, the name of your first pet, that trip you said you wanted to take someday, almost in passing. It's those details that somehow make their way back into the conversation seemingly out of nowhere. And here's the strange part. They do this while still pretending the relationship is casual or insignificant. It's a contradiction, but it's real. They might act indifferent as if you're just another person in their life, like nothing is that serious. But then something slips. They reference something obscure about you, something deeply personal that only someone who was paying close attention would remember. And that's the point. They are paying close attention. But instead of expressing care through connection, they tuck these moments away like emotional artifacts, quietly, privately, as if collecting pieces of you is safer than actually holding you close. This tells you something very important. Their emotional detachment is not the same as emotional absence. Avoidants are often incredibly observant, especially when it comes to people they have feelings for. But because they don't feel safe being emotionally open, they resort to this indirect form of intimacy. They remember what matters to you, even if they don't say that you matter to them. It's the emotional version of watching someone through a window, instead of inviting them inside. To someone secure, this behavior feels confusing. You start asking yourself questions like, if they don't care, why do they remember so much? That's your instinct, noticing a mismatch. And you're not wrong. Their memory is revealing more than their words ever will. It's their unconscious way of staying close, of keeping you present in their internal world without having to take the risk of vulnerability. But this is where it becomes emotionally exhausting for you. Because they're creating a one-sided bond. You may feel like they're with you, like they care, but they're not saying it. They're not showing it in ways that feel safe, open, or mutual. And over time, that kind of hidden emotional attachment starts to feel like emotional gaslighting. You sense a connection, but it's never clearly confirmed. It lives in the shadows, never in the light. So when you see them bring up something from months ago that even you forgot, take note. Not because it proves they're ready, but because it shows you where they're stuck. They're emotionally invested, but emotionally unavailable. And that's a difficult place to be for both of you. Because love remembered is not the same as love received. You deserve someone who doesn't just store memories of you like souvenirs, but someone who chooses to show up for you clearly, consistently, and courageously. Let's move to one of the most confusing signs when avoidants stay close, but not too close. It's like they're orbiting your world, never really gone, but never fully present either. And if you're not careful, it starts to feel like connection. But it's not. What they're really doing is staying just close enough to feel your presence without actually opening themselves up to being seen or being known. It's emotional proximity without emotional risk. You'll notice this pattern if you've ever had someone avoid direct contact with you, but somehow they're still around. They don't respond to your messages, but they comment on a friend's post where you're tagged. They won't reach out to see how you're doing, but they suddenly show up at the same event or start posting on social media when you go quiet. And when you see that a part of you might get hopeful, you think they still care, they're not really gone, and technically that's true. But what they're offering isn't presence, it's avoidance disguised as curiosity. This is how avoidants protect themselves. They manage closeness like a thermostat, always adjusting, always monitoring, always staying in control. If they get too close and feel vulnerable, they back off. But if they sense you drifting too far away, they find subtle ways to reappear. Not with open communication, but through signals. signals that don't demand anything from them emotionally. Because showing up directly would mean risking rejection, risking real intimacy, and that's what they're trying to avoid at all costs. And it's confusing because your nervous system responds to those signals. You feel their presence even if it's vague. You pick up on their energy and it keeps you emotionally tethered. That's the trap. You're stuck in a loop of sensing their nearness but never getting their full self. You end up trying to decode breadcrumbs, piecing together a relationship from shadows instead of substance. What you need to understand is this: proximity is not the same as intimacy. Just because someone stays nearby doesn't mean they're showing up for you. It might mean they're using your presence as comfort while still avoiding the responsibility of connection. And that's not something to romanticize. That's something to be honest about. Because if you keep confusing nearness with availability, you'll keep settling for attention instead of affection. So when you notice them hovering present but distant, you need to ask yourself, am I being chosen or am I just being watched? There's a difference. Real intimacy requires someone to step out of the shadows and meet you in the light. To not just exist in your space, but to claim a place in it. If they can't do that, then it's okay to stop responding to their silent signals. You don't owe your energy to someone who only wants to feel close when it's safe for them, but never safe for you. You deserve more than someone who lingers. You deserve someone who arrives. Now we come to the most painful part of all this, when things start to get real and the avoidant pulls away. You've probably seen it happen right at the moment where everything seems to be going well. The connection feels solid. Emotions are finally being shared. Maybe you even feel like you're both opening up, and then suddenly they're gone. Not always literally, but emotionally, absolutely. They might ghost. They might pick a fight out of nowhere. Or they might just quietly retreat and say they need space. It's jarring, and it often leaves you feeling blindsided. But here's the part people don't always understand. This isn't because they stopped caring. It's often because they care too much and it scares them. Avoidants live with a nervous system that associates closeness with danger. Somewhere in their early emotional blueprint, they learned that opening up equals risk. So when things start to feel emotionally intimate, when vulnerability becomes real instead of theoretical, their body goes into survival mode. And survival for the avoidant means pulling back before they get swallowed. They fear being hurt, but they also fear being seen. They fear being needed, but also being abandoned. It's a contradiction they haven't worked through, and that contradiction shows up in self-sabotage. Because deep down, many avoidantly attached people believe that if they let someone in, they'll eventually lose them, or worse, lose themselves. So rather than face that imagined pain down the road, they try to control when and how the closeness breaks. They'd rather be the one to pull away than be the one left behind. You'll know you're dealing with this when someone starts creating problems where there weren't any before. Suddenly they're misinterpreting your tone. They're suspicious of your motives. They accuse you of being too much or moving too fast, even when you've barely asked for anything. It's like their emotional alarm system has been triggered, and they need to break the bond to feel safe again. But here's the tragedy. It's not really you they're trying to get away from. It's the part of themselves that still hasn't learned how to tolerate closeness without fear. You're just standing in front of it. And unless they're willing to confront that fear and work through it, the pattern will keep repeating no matter how understanding or patient you are. That's why it's so important not to take this behavior personally. Their sabotage doesn't mean you weren't good enough. It doesn't mean you asked for too much. It means their emotional capacity hit its limit, and instead of expanding, they retreated. That's their work, not yours. Your job isn't to rescue them or prove your worth. Your job is to stay clear on what love should feel like: safe, mutual, and open. So if they leave when things get close, remember this: it's not because you did something wrong. It's because connection touched a part of them they've never felt safe holding. And you deserve someone who doesn't run from that. You deserve someone who stays. Let's bring this full circle. If you've ever been stuck in a relationship or almost relationship where someone seems drawn to you, yet always keeps you at arm's length, you know how confusing and painful it can be. They remember everything, they watch from afar, they react when you pull away. But when it comes time to show up, they vanish. It messes with your sense of reality. It makes you question yourself. But what we've talked about today should give you a deeper, clearer lens. Here's the truth. Obsession is not the same as love. It's not even the same as readiness. Someone can be consumed with thoughts of you and still lack the emotional tools to actually connect with you. And that can leave you in a place of constant guessing, feeling chosen one day and forgotten the next. But love, real love, isn't meant to be that unstable. It's meant to grow in clarity, not confusion. In this video, we looked at 5 powerful signs that an avoidant person may be secretly obsessed with you. We talked about how they watch from a distance, how they panic when you detach, how their memory clings to the smallest details of you, how they hover close but never fully engage, and how they often self-sabotage just when things start to feel real. These patterns are not random. They're protective reflexes rooted in fear. And unless that fear is addressed by them, not by you, those walls won't come down. So what does that mean for you? It means stop romanticizing potential. Start honoring reality. If someone isn't emotionally available, if their care is hidden behind avoidance or games, it is not your job to decode them. You're allowed to want directness. You're allowed to want spoken love, not just someone who watches you silently from the shadows. Wanting you is not enough. They must be willing to show up for you. Thank you for watching today's video. If this brought you clarity, if it helped you name something you've been feeling, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have more grounded, honest conversations ahead about attachment, emotional maturity, and how to build relationships that don't require you to abandon yourself. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with someone who showed these signs? What did it feel like? What helped you find your way forward? Until next time, take care of your heart. Protect your peace, and remember you are worthy of love that is clear, mutual, and steady. Never settle for anything less.